I never thought the day would come when I would sit in a courtroom and hear my husband's lover raise her right hand, swear to tell the truth, and then point at me as if I were the villain. But that day came. The wooden benches creaked as dozens of strangers leaned forward, hungry for scandal, while the judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at me with a mixture of boredom and suspicion. My chest burned with humiliation. Can you imagine what it feels like to be betrayed twice at the same time? Once by the man you gave your life to, and again by the woman he had taken into his arms behind your back. I could hear her voice trembling with fake innocence as she told the court that I was manipulative, greedy, a woman who had feigned illness to hold on to assets that, according to her, should belong to her beloved Julian. Yes, she said his name like that, tender, possessive, as if she owned him. Every word that fell from her lips was a dagger, not just cutting into me, but branding me as a liar before the entire room. My husband sat smugly at his attorney's table, his lips curled into the kind of smile that had once charmed me, but now reeked of cruelty. His eyes did not meet mine. He watched her, not me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tear apart every lie she spewed. But instead, I sat still, my hands folded, my knuckles white, my heart pounding like a trapped bird against my ribs. And in that silence, something inside me hardened. They thought I was defenseless. They thought I had already lost, but they had no idea that tucked away deep in my purse was the one thing that could destroy them both. That morning, when I dressed in my navy blue suit, when I pinned my hair in a modest bun and fastened the pearl earrings my mother once gave me, I knew I wasn't just walking into a courtroom. I was walking into a battlefield. My enemies were not strangers. My enemies were the people who had vowed to protect me, to love me, to honor me. And now they had turned my life into a grotesque theater with me cast as the villain. But they forgot one thing. I was not just a victim. I was the keeper of truths they had carelessly spilled when they thought no one was listening. Her testimony was vicious. She claimed I had tried to bribe her to leave Julian. She said I had threatened her. She even said that I was mentally unstable, that I fabricated stories of abuse to garner sympathy. Each lie was more outrageous than the last, and yet as I glanced around the courtroom, I saw doubt flicker in the jurors' eyes. Do you know what it feels like when people look at you, not with compassion, but with suspicion? To know that in their minds you might be the villain your enemies paint you to be. I sat there, my throat dry, my stomach twisting, and I asked myself, how far will betrayal go before it finally consumes everything? The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even he seemed to pity me as she described me as a woman past her prime, clinging to wealth she did not deserve. And my husband, the man I once believed was my safe harbor, leaned closer to her, whispering encouragement as if she were his heroine. That image will be burned into my memory until the day I die, my husband smiling at another woman while she shredded my dignity in front of strangers. But here's what no one in that room knew. I was not broken, I was waiting for the moment when their arrogance would blind them completely, waiting for the moment when their laughter would echo too loud, their lies stretch too far, because tucked inside my purse was a recording of the two of them in his office, whispering about how they would ruin me, how they would use the courts to strip me of everything I had built, how they would laugh when I had nothing left but shame. That recording, my secret weapon, pulsed like fire in my hands. As she went on describing me as a parasite, I closed my eyes and let her words sink in. Each word hurt, but each word also fueled me. I thought back to the years I had given him, the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the mornings I prepared his breakfast before long days at work, the decades I had believed in the promise of forever. And here he was, betraying me, not only with another woman, but also with a plan to erase me from my own life. I swallowed the bitterness and held on to one truth. This story wasn't going to end the way they wanted. I looked at the jury. I looked at the judge. And then, for a brief moment, I looked at her. Her eyes glittered with triumph. She believed she had already won. And my husband, no, not my husband anymore, but the stranger wearing his face, rested his hand on hers. The audacity of it made me shiver. That was the moment I decided they would regret underestimating me. So I sat there calm, silent, waiting. I listened to every accusation, every false claim. I let the courtroom taste the poison they poured into it. Because I knew something they didn't, the antidote was already in my possession. I could almost hear the words playing in my head, their voices caught forever in that recording. Julian's voice, deep and certain. She trusts me too much. Leave it all to me. Soon everything she owns will be ours. And her reply, like a venomous whisper, I can't wait to see her face when she has nothing left. Those words, their words, would soon burn through the lies they tried to weave today. And now I turn to you, listening to my story. Tell me, what would you do if the person you loved most turned you into the villain of your own life? Would you sit silently and let them strip you bare? Or would you rise and make them face the truth they tried to bury? Comment. A number 1 if you believe no betrayal should go unpunished, and hit the like button if you agree that silence is never weakness. Because very soon in that same courtroom where they laughed at me, they would learn the cost of mocking the woman who had given them everything. The first crack in my carefully built world came on a quiet Thursday evening, the kind of night that should have been uneventful, the kind of night when the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock are the only sounds. Julian had claimed he was working late, some important client who needed his attention. I wanted to believe him, but as I stood washing the last dish, the faint vibration of his phone caught my ear. He had left it on the counter. Julian never left his phone lying around. It was an extension of his hand, always locked, always guarded. My stomach tightened. I should have ignored it. I should have respected boundaries. But when betrayal lingers in the air like a strange perfume, it draws you in whether you want it or not. Want it. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up instantly, and what I saw made my breath stop. A notification, a message from a contact saved only as E. The preview line glowed on the screen. I can still taste you. Same time tomorrow. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the device. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was spam, maybe it was a cruel joke. But deep down in that place we try to ignore because it's too painful. I knew the truth had just tapped me on the shoulder. I tapped to open the message thread. Dozens of texts scrolled before my eyes, words dripping with intimacy, with secrets that had no place in a marriage. There were pictures too, nothing explicit but enough to burn my cheeks with shame. Her hand resting on his, a blurry shot of a wine glass clinking against his. My vision blurred. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. 40 years together, and he was telling another woman the same words he once whispered to me. I placed the phone back exactly as I had found it, careful not to disturb a single detail. But the damage was already done. The kitchen around me seemed alien, every familiar object now mocking me. The wedding photo on the wall, the anniversary card still tucked into the corner of the fridge, the faint smell of Julian's cologne still lingering in the air, they all turned into cruel reminders of how blind I had been. I whispered to myself, no, not him. He wouldn't do this. But even as I said the words, I knew I was lying. That night when he came home, he was humming softly in a good mood, as if life had never been sweeter. He kissed me on the cheek and asked about dinner. I forced a smile, placed a plate in front of him, and sat across the table studying every movement, the way his eyes sparkled when his phone buzzed the quick glance he stole at the screen before shoving it back into his pocket. The secretive smile he tried to hide, all of it screamed that the man I thought I knew had already crossed into another life. I barely slept. The shadows on the bedroom ceiling stretched like long, accusing fingers, pointing at me, mocking me for not seeing it sooner. Memories flashed in my mind, his sudden late nights, the new shirts he bought, without telling me the way he started wearing cologne again after years of not caring. Each memory now twisted into evidence, each one screaming what I had refused to acknowledge. The next day when he left for work, I searched the laundry basket. It felt shameful, like I was violating some unspoken rule, but desperation doesn't care about dignity. At the bottom, tucked between his shirts, I found a small folded receipt. My heart pounded as I opened it. A fancy restaurant, 2 entrees, a bottle of Cabernet. The date matched one of the nights he had told me he was stuck at the office. The wine was the same brand he had once bought me for our 10th anniversary. The one he swore was our wine. Now it was theirs. I remember sinking onto the cold bathroom tile receipt, trembling in my hand, tears streaming down my face. It was not just betrayal. It was recycling the tokens of our love, repurposing them for another woman. That kind of cruelty has a unique sting. My chest ached so much it felt like a physical wound. I didn't confront him that night. No, something inside me told me to wait, to collect, to build. A single accusation could be denied, dismissed, twisted back on me. I needed more. I needed truth that could not be erased with smooth lies. So I began watching him not like a wife, but like an investigator. Every time he stepped out, I noted the time. Every phone call he took in the hallway, every unexplained errand, I recorded it silently in my mind. One evening, I smelled something foreign on his jacket, a perfume that wasn't mine. Sweet floral cloying. I pressed my face into the fabric and inhaled, my eyes stinging. The scent wasn't just on him, it clung to him, marking him like a signature. I hung the jacket back in the closet, but that smell lingered in the room, haunting me. I confided in no one. Who would I tell our children who adored their father? My friends, who always said we were the perfect couple. The shame was too heavy. I carried it alone. My silence became a mask, one I wore every day as I prepared breakfast, as I folded laundry, as I smiled politely to neighbors. But inside, I was crumbling. It was during one of those silent evenings when Julian claimed he had another late meeting that I followed him. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel as I drove 2 cars behind him, keeping my headlights low, my heart racing. He pulled into a hotel parking lot. My throat tightened as I watched him step out, smooth his tie, and open the passenger door for her. She stepped out gracefully, adjusting her hair, smiling at him in a way that once was mine. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I sat there as if turned to stone, watching my life shatter quietly in front of me. I didn't confront them, not yet. I let them disappear into the hotel, the neon sign buzzing above like a cruel spotlight. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring as tears filled my eyes. I parked in the driveway and sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel long after the engine went cold. In that silence, a thought began to grow. If they thought I was blind, if they thought I was weak, then maybe I could use that. Maybe I could let them believe they had already won while I prepared the truth in secret. That was the night I stopped being a wife in denial. That was the night I became something else entirely. I became a woman with a mission, a woman who would gather every shred of evidence, every slip of the tongue, every cruel laugh they thought I couldn't hear. They thought they were building a case against me. They had no idea I was already building mine. It was one thing to suspect another to catch the scent of perfume on his jacket, but it was something entirely different when the people around me began to notice. You can pretend for a while that what you see with your own eyes might be a misunderstanding, but when others start whispering, when those closest to you begin to connect, the same dots, denial becomes impossible. I remember the day my oldest friend Martha came to see me. We'd been inseparable since high school, through every heartbreak and celebration, the kind of friend who knows when your smile is real and when it's only painted on. She arrived with a box of pastries from the bakery downtown, but her eyes betrayed a tension I recognized immediately. She kept glancing at me as if she were holding something heavy that she wasn't sure I could carry. Finally, over the second cup of coffee, she leaned forward and whispered, "Ellie, I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to hate me for it." Her words made my chest tighten. I forced a smile, tried to steady my hands, and nodded for her to continue. She looked down at her cup as if she couldn't meet my eyes. "Last Saturday night, I went out to dinner with some cousins. We were at that Italian place, the one with the red awning near the park. And Ellie, I saw Julian there. He wasn't alone." My heart froze. I already knew what she was going to say, but hearing it out loud made the walls tilt around me. He was with a woman. Blonde, maybe younger than us, but not too young. They looked comfortable. Too comfortable. I tried to breathe normally, to sip my coffee as though the world hadn't just collapsed under me again. But my hands shook so badly that coffee spilled over the rim. Martha reached for my hand, squeezing it. "I didn't want to tell you, but I couldn't live with myself if I kept it from you. They didn't see me, but I saw them." She hesitated, then added, "He touched her hand, Ellie, like lovers do." Her words pierced deeper than the perfume, deeper than the receipt. The truth was no longer locked in his phone or hidden in a hotel parking lot. It was walking in public, exposed, flaunted as if my humiliation didn't even require secrecy anymore. I nodded, whispered a thank you, and swallowed the scream that wanted to claw its way out of me. That night, Julian came home late again. He smelled faintly of wine, the same brand I had seen on the receipt. I set dinner in front of him, pretending nothing was wrong. He laughed about a boring meeting, unaware that every bite he took felt like poison to me. When he kissed my cheek before bed, I stood stiff as stone, my heart screaming, "Who are you?" But it didn't end there. A week later, while sorting through laundry, I found something that made my knees buckle. In the pocket of his trousers was an envelope carelessly tucked away. I pulled it out, expecting maybe another receipt. Instead, it was a business card for a law office clipped to a single sheet of paper. The heading at the top made my breath catch. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." My name printed there in stark black letters. I read the first lines through a blur of tears. He wasn't just betraying me with another woman. He was preparing to erase me from his life entirely. I sat on the floor, clutching that paper, rocking back and forth like a child. 40 years together, and he was plotting my erasure behind my back. He wanted to strip me not only of his affection, but of everything I had worked for, everything we had built. He wanted to make me the disposable one, the obstacle to his shiny new future. My chest burned with rage so fierce it scared me. I didn't confront him. No, not yet. Confrontation would mean revealing what I knew, and then he would simply retreat deeper into the shadows, hiding evidence, covering tracks. Instead, I folded the paper, slipped it into my dresser drawer, and decided to keep playing the dutiful wife he thought I was. I cooked, I cleaned, I smiled at neighbors, but every moment I was listening, watching, collecting. It was Martha again who gave me the next piece of the puzzle. She called me one morning, her voice trembling. "Ellie, I don't want to upset you, but I think you should know. I saw them again." My grip on the phone tightened. Where I asked, though, part of me already dreaded the answer. At the Willow Hotel. They walked in together. I was across the street. They didn't see me, but it was them. He opened the door for her. She laughed. It looked intimate. I thanked her, my voice hollow. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the floral tablecloth, the same one we had bought together years ago during a trip. Everything in that kitchen held memories of a life he was dismantling, piece by piece. I whispered to myself, he thinks I'm blind. He thinks I'll accept whatever scraps he leaves me. But I was no longer blind. I was wide awake. The days that followed were heavy. Julian was distant, but he didn't bother hiding it anymore. He spent more time working late, his phone buzzing constantly, his laughter echoing from behind the closed study door. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him typing, whispering sometimes, chuckling under his breath. I lay in the dark, my fists clenched, thinking about that petition for divorce hidden in my drawer. What haunted me most wasn't the betrayal itself, but the performance. The way he smiled at me in public, the way he held my hand at church, the way he spoke about our plans as if nothing had changed. He was crafting a narrative where I would look like the bitter wife who couldn't accept reality. He was preparing to paint me as unstable, unfit, clinging. And the woman, the lover, was no longer just a shadow. She was stepping into my place one calculated step at a time. One evening, while Julian showered, I slipped into his study. The air smelled faintly of his cologne and something else, her perfume, I was sure of it. On his desk lay a folder. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were drafts of financial statements, lists of assets notes about redistribution. My name appeared only in the margins, scribbled like an afterthought. But hers, her initials, were everywhere. My vision blurred with tears. He wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to give her everything. I closed the folder, carefully returned it exactly where it had been, and slipped out before he emerged from the shower. I stood in the hallway, heart pounding, the sound of running water masking my ragged breathing. That was the night I realized the scope of the war I was in. This wasn't about infidelity anymore. This was about survival. But even in that storm, there was a flicker of something else inside me. Not just rage, but clarity. If he wanted to build a case, if he wanted to use the courts to erase me, then I needed to prepare mine. I needed allies' evidence strength. They thought they were weaving a perfect web, but they had underestimated the woman they thought was already broken. And so I waited, silent but alert. Each lie he told each late night, each strange perfume I tucked away in my memory like pieces of a puzzle. I smiled at him over breakfast, asked about his meetings, and listened carefully to every slip of the tongue. And each time he kissed me goodbye, I whispered silently in my heart, "Keep playing your game, Julian. You have no idea the storm that's coming." That was round 2 of my descent into betrayal, the moment when the secret affair became a conspiracy to erase me completely. And yet, even as I faced the abyss, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was not going to be the one who fell. They were. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from realizing you're surrounded by people who no longer see you. That was the loneliness I woke up to each morning as Julian's shadow fell larger over my life. It wasn't just his absence anymore, not just the perfume on his jacket or the receipts hidden in his pockets. It was the way he started to turn everyone around me against me, the way he planted seeds of doubt until the people I loved most began to look at me differently. It began with subtle comments at dinner. Our son Daniel sat across from me, his fork scraping the plate as he asked, "Mom, are you okay? Dad says you've been forgetful lately." I froze my spoon halfway to my mouth. Forgetful, I wanted to laugh, to scream. I wasn't the one forgetting the vows we made. But I smiled weakly and said, "I'm fine, dear." Daniel nodded, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. I knew then that Julian had already begun weaving his story. A few days later, my daughter Emily came by with the grandchildren. Normally, her visits were my joy, a reminder that not everything in life had turned sour. But that day, she seemed distracted, hesitant. As the kids played in the yard, she pulled me aside and said softly, "Mom, Dad told me you've been imagining things. He says you're convinced he's hiding something, but he swears he isn't. Are you sure you're not misreading?" The words hit me harder than any slap could have. My own daughter, the girl I raised with every ounce of love I had, was looking at me as if I were unstable. I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my voice. "Emily, do you really think I would invent this? Do you think I don't know what betrayal smells like?" Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she didn't answer. She just squeezed my hand and said, "I just want you to be okay." That was when I realized Julian wasn't just betraying me in secret. He was laying the groundwork to destroy my credibility, to strip me not only of my marriage, but of my sanity in the eyes of my family. He wanted them to see me as fragile, delusional a woman who needed to be set aside. That realization burned me more than the affair itself. The house became colder. Conversations grew shorter. Julian rarely ate at home anymore, and when he did, he complained about the food. "Too salty," he muttered one night, pushing his plate away. "You used to cook better." The sting of those words made my eyes water, not because of the insult itself, but because of how deliberately he was erasing every part of the woman I used to be. At night, I lay awake listening to the silence between us. He no longer reached for me, no longer said goodnight. Instead, he turned his back, scrolling through his phone until the glow lit his face like a mask. Sometimes he laughed softly at something she had written to him. That laugh pierced me more deeply than any shouted argument could have. The walls of isolation closed tighter when I overheard him speaking on the phone one afternoon. He thought I was in the garden, but I had returned inside quietly. His voice was low, sharp. "Don't worry, she'll break soon. Everyone already thinks she's unstable. By the time we're in court, no one will believe a word she says." I froze in the hallway, clutching the banister to keep myself steady. His words confirmed what I had begun to fear. This wasn't just an affair. This was a campaign, a calculated plan to erase me from my own life. I began noticing little changes. Friends stopped calling as often. Neighbors who once waved warmly seemed hesitant as if they knew something about me. I didn't. Gossip travels quickly in small communities, and Julian knew how to use it like a weapon. I could almost hear the whispers, "Poor Ellie, she's losing her mind, she can't handle reality." Each rumor was another nail in the coffin he was building for me. The breaking point came one afternoon when Emily returned with the children. She stepped into the kitchen and noticed the stack of documents I had hidden under a pile of newspapers, the divorce petition, the financial drafts I had copied. Her eyes widened. "Mom, what is this?" I tried to explain, tried to show her that I wasn't imagining things. But before I could finish, she shook her head. "Dad told me you'd start seeing conspiracies everywhere. I didn't want to believe him, but this..." She trailed off, her voice trembling. I reached for her hand, desperate. "Emily, please. He's lying. He's setting me up." But she pulled back, her eyes filled with pity. "Mom, maybe you should talk to someone, maybe a doctor." That moment cut me deeper than anything Julian had done. My daughter believed him. My own flesh and blood thought I was losing my grip on reality. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to show her everything. But I held it in, because rage would only confirm the picture he was painting of me. Instead, I smiled bitterly and said, "Don't worry, Emily. I know exactly what I'm doing." When she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the documents spread before me. My tears fell onto the pages, smearing the ink. The loneliness was unbearable, but beneath it, a fire began to smolder. If he wanted to portray me as crazy, then I would be calm. If he wanted to silence me, then I would gather evidence. If he wanted me erased, then I would carve my name deeper than ever. It was later that week when the message came. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed, an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. The words made my blood run cold. "After the court hearing, you'll have nothing left. Enjoy what little time you have." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. The message was signed with a single initial E, the lover. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was taunting me directly. My knees buckled and I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the phone. Every part of me wanted to collapse, to scream, to beg the heavens for mercy. But then I heard her laugh in my mind, that high-pitched, mocking laugh from the hotel parking lot, and something shifted inside me. Fear turned to fury. If she thought she could intimidate me, she was wrong. She had just given me proof that this was more than infidelity, it was collusion, a conspiracy. I saved the message, locked it away in a folder on my phone. Then I looked into the mirror. The woman staring back at me was pale, weary, her eyes rimmed with sleepless nights. But deep within those eyes was something harder, sharper. Not a broken wife, not a discarded mother, but a woman who had finally stopped denying the storm around her. The isolation was almost complete. My children doubted me. My friends whispered, my husband mocked me, and his lover threatened me. I was standing on the edge of a cliff with no one beside me. But in that silence, in that unbearable loneliness, I made a vow: if they wanted to paint me as the villain, then I would show them the truth of their own sins. And when I finally spoke, the world would listen. There comes a moment in every war when the enemy's blows land so heavy, you wonder if you can stand another second. For me, that moment arrived on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day where the clouds hang low and even the air feels heavy. The house was silent except for the tick of the old wall clock and the faint drip of water outside the window. Julian had left early, his cologne still lingering like poison in the air. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the remnants of breakfast untouched. My appetite had long since died. What I hungered for now wasn't food but truth, a truth that seemed to slip further away each time I reached for it. The weeks had worn me thin. My children barely spoke to me without pity. Friends avoided me as if I carried a contagion, and Julian moved around the house like a stranger. Sometimes he looked at me with a smirk as if daring me to speak, daring me to expose myself as the unstable woman he had painted for everyone else. I kept silent even as the silence cut me deeper than words. That Tuesday afternoon a letter arrived. The envelope was thick official, and when I tore it open, my hands shook so badly I nearly ripped the pages inside. It was a notice from the court. Julian had filed for divorce formally. The date was set, the petition already signed, sealed, delivered. I read the words over and over, my vision blurring as if the letters themselves were conspiring to drive me mad. He wasn't hiding anymore. He had declared war in plain sight. I pressed the paper to my chest, rocking back and forth like a child. 40 years together, and this was how he chose to end it, by blindsiding me with a legal ambush, by trying to strip me of not only my marriage, but my dignity. My body shook with sobs I couldn't contain. I buried my face in my hands and whispered, why, after everything I gave you? But the only answer was the steady tick of the clock, a cruel reminder that time marches on even when your world collapses. The days leading up to the court hearing were a blur of humiliation. Julian paraded around as if he had already won his lover by his side. I saw them together once in the grocery store parking lot. She laughed as he carried bags to her car, his hand brushing her cheek in a way that once belonged only to me. Neighbors saw too, and their eyes darted away from mine when I walked past. Whispers rose like smoke. "Poor woman, she can't accept reality," I heard one voice murmur. Another whispered, "He looks so happy now. Maybe she really was the problem." Those words sank into me like knives. One night, after enduring another silent dinner, where Julian spent more time on his phone than speaking to me, I collapsed onto the bathroom floor. The cold tiles pressed against my cheek as sobs racked my body. Memories flooded in cruel reminders of the life I thought I had. The first years of our marriage, when we could barely afford rent, but laughed as we cooked meals together on a second-hand stove. The night he held my hand as I gave birth to Daniel, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "You're the strongest woman I know." The decades of birthdays, anniversaries, holidays spent building a family, a home, a future. How easily he had thrown it all away. How easily he had let another woman step into the role I had fought so hard to uphold. I closed my eyes, the taste of salt on my lips, and wondered if maybe he was right, if maybe I was the one losing my grip. Maybe love had blinded me so completely that I had become pathetic, a ghost, clinging to a man who no longer cared whether I lived or died. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman who looked back at me was unrecognizable. Hollow eyes, pale skin, lips pressed into a trembling line. "Is this what I've become?" I whispered. For the first time, I truly considered surrendering. Packing a bag, leaving the house, letting him have everything. Let him take the money, the house, the lies. Maybe peace would be found in absence, in vanishing from the life that no longer wanted me. But just as quickly as that thought entered, another memory surged to the surface. The night I worked 3 shifts in a row to afford Emily's college tuition. The mornings I woke before dawn to prepare lunches, iron shirts, and keep the household running, while Julian pursued his so-called career moves. The years I put my own dreams aside to ensure his were fulfilled. Those sacrifices had built the foundation of everything he now wanted to claim as his own. No, I thought, pressing my palms against the sink. This house, this life, these years, they were mine too, and I would not be erased so easily. It was almost midnight when I stumbled into Julian's study, desperate for any thread of proof, any weapon to fight back with. The rain tapped against the window as I rifled through his desk drawers. At first, all I found were bills, business cards, scraps of paper with meaningless notes. My hands trembled, ready to give up, when I noticed the corner of a small black notebook wedged beneath a stack of folders. My pulse quickened as I pulled it free. The notebook was filled with his handwriting, neat and meticulous. At first, it seemed harmless lists of expenses, meetings, reminders. But then, halfway through, I found it. My breath caught. There, in his own words, he had written, "Plan with e-build case against Ellie. Portray her as unstable. Secure assets in my name. Ensure no paper trail connects her to finances." I read those lines again and again, my body trembling. He had documented his conspiracy in ink, a roadmap of betrayal. But that wasn't the worst of it. Tucked in the back pocket of the notebook was a flash drive. My fingers shook as I inserted it into the small laptop on his desk. A folder opened with audio files, each labeled with dates. I clicked the first one, and the sound of Julian's voice filled the room. "Don't worry," he whispered to someone, "her no doubt she won't fight. She's too broken. Once the judge sees how unstable she is, we'll have everything." I covered my mouth to keep from crying out. File after file played, each one worse than the last. Her voice mingled with his mocking me, planning how they would enjoy the fruits of my labor once I was cast aside. "She still cooks for you," she giggled in one recording. "What a fool. Soon she'll be the one begging in court while we celebrate." Their laughter rang through the speakers, echoing in the dark room like a death knell. I sat, frozen tears streaming down my face, but alongside the despair came something else, a surge of clarity, of strength. Here it was, proof. Not just suspicion, not just perfume or receipts, but undeniable evidence in their own voices. They wanted to portray me as unstable. I would show the world exactly who they were. I copied the files onto a separate flash drive, tucking it safely into my purse. My hands still shook my body, still weak, but inside, something had shifted. For weeks, they had beaten me down, isolated me, made me question my own sanity. But tonight, the tide turned. Tonight, I held the weapon they never thought I would find. I sat in the darkness of that study long after the rain stopped the flash drive heavy in my hand. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And for the first time in months, I felt the faint flicker of hope stirring inside me, fragile, but fierce. The night I found that notebook and those recordings, something in me cracked wide open. But it wasn't the shattering of defeat. It was the breaking of chains. For months, I had been drowning under the weight of his lies, crushed by the whispers of family and neighbors, suffocated by the smirk on his face and the venom on her lips. But when I heard their voices plotting in secret, mocking me as if I were already dead, I realized the truth. I had been silent too long. My silence was their weapon, and if I kept it, they would bury me with it. That night, I decided the silence would end. I spent the next morning replaying those audio files over and over until their laughter no longer made me cry, but made me stronger. Each cruel word became a brick in the foundation of the case I would build. Each plan they whispered became ammunition. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't broken. I was a woman with proof, with clarity, with a fury sharpened into steel. I called Martha first. My voice trembled, but it wasn't with weakness, it was with determination. "I need your help," I told her. She didn't ask questions. She heard the tone in my voice and simply said, "Tell me when and where." That was the kind of friend she had always been. Then I made the call I had dreaded for weeks. Attorney Lewis, a man I had met years ago when we first drafted our will. I told him everything, sparing no detail, my voice steady, as I described the betrayal, the affair, the recordings. There was a long silence on the other end, and then he said words that made my heart beat faster. "Mrs. Jenkins, what you're describing is not just betrayal. It's fraud. It's coercion. And with this evidence, you have more power than you realize. Bring everything to my office. We'll build your defense together. I hung up the phone and pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window. For the first time in months, the world didn't look gray. The rain outside shimmered like possibility. My hands still trembled, but this time it was from adrenaline, from the rush of knowing I wasn't walking into court defenseless. They had underestimated me, and that was their fatal mistake. The following days were a blur of preparation. I collected every document, every receipt, every threatening message, and placed them neatly in folders. I labeled everything, cross-referenced dates, built a timeline so airtight it would suffocate their lies. Each night, as Julian stayed out working late, I sat at the dining table with my files spread before me, working until dawn with the precision of a soldier sharpening her sword. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the hollow woman from before. I saw fire in my eyes, lines of determination etched deeper than wrinkles. I didn't reveal my hand. At breakfast, I still placed his coffee in front of him, still smiled faintly when he muttered about long meetings. But inside, I was laughing. I wanted him to believe I was broken, to believe I was defeated. Let him underestimate me. Let him smirk. The more he believed the lie, the sweeter the truth would strike. One evening, he leaned across the table and said, "You know, Ellie, you don't have to make this hard. If you just sign the papers quietly, we can settle things. You'll have enough to live comfortably." I looked him in the eye and asked softly, "And what about the years I gave you, the children I raised, the nights I worked while you slept? What are those worth to you?" He blinked, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. Then he shrugged. "That's the past. We have to think about the future. His future. Their future. Not ours." I smiled faintly, biting back the truth burning on my tongue. One day soon, he would know exactly what those years were worth. The night before our court date, I sat at my desk writing in my journal. I wrote not just about the pain, but about the strength I had found in that pain. I wrote about the fire that had kept me alive even when everyone else doubted me. And then, looking into the mirror, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow the victim dies. Tomorrow the fighter rises." And now I want to ask you, the one listening to my story, what would you do if you found proof that the people closest to you were conspiring to erase you? Would you crumble under their lies, or would you rise and show them that the truth is stronger than any betrayal? Comment a number 1 if you believe no betrayal should ever go unpunished, and hit the like button. If you agree that silence in the face of injustice is not strength, it's surrender. Don't let them convince you that being quiet is noble. Sometimes silence is the very thing that kills us. The next morning, I dressed not in mourning, but in armor. My navy dress, the pearls from my mother, the flash drive, tucked safely in my purse. Each step toward the courthouse echoed with resolve. I wasn't walking into an execution. I was walking into a reckoning, and they had no idea what was coming. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and disinfectant, a place where lives were decided in hushed tones and slammed gavels. I had arrived early, too early, unable to sit still in my house, where every object reminded me of his betrayal. My heels echoed down the hallway as I made my way to the waiting area outside the courtroom. The benches were hard, the lighting harsh, and my heart pounded with the steady rhythm of war drums. My lawyer had stepped away to review the files one last time, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That's when I heard it, his laugh. It was a sound that once melted me, once told me I was safe, once promised me that I had a partner in this world. Now it was a dagger, sharp and mocking, echoing down the hallway as he approached. Julian walked toward me in a crisp gray suit, polished shoes, and a confidence that made me sick. At his side was his lover, dressed in black, as if she wanted the world to believe she was the grieving saint and not the thief. They walked as if they owned the place, as if they were already celebrating their victory. When he saw me sitting there, he stopped. For a moment, our eyes locked. I searched his face for any trace of the man I had once known, the man who had held my hand through childbirth, who had danced with me in the kitchen to old records, who had whispered promises under the stars. But there was nothing. His eyes were cold, hard, and distant. He walked toward me, leaving her a few steps behind, and sat down across the bench. "You look tired," he said casually, as if we were strangers making small talk. His voice carried the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. I took a slow breath, willing my hands not to tremble. "That tends to happen when your husband stabs you in the back," I replied, my voice calm, controlled. He smirked, leaning forward. "Ellie, don't make this harder than it has to be. You know this marriage has been over for a long time. You just couldn't accept it. That's why we're here. You can fight all you want, but in the end, the judge will see what everyone else sees, a bitter woman clinging to a life that's gone." I studied him, his face so familiar and yet so foreign. "Tell me, Julian." I asked softly, "Do you ever feel guilt? Do you ever lie awake at night and remember the vows you made to me? Or has she already erased every memory we had together?" For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, irritation maybe, or the faintest crack in his armor. He leaned back, exhaling sharply. "You're living in the past, Ellie. I'm moving on. You should too. We can do this quietly with dignity, or you can embarrass yourself in there today." He nodded toward the courtroom doors, his voice dripping with disdain. I forced a smile, though my heart hammered in my chest. "Dignity," I repeated. Interesting word coming from a man who lost his long ago. His jaw tightened, and for a moment his mask slipped. I saw the cruelty, the rage that he usually saved for private. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "Listen to me. If you fight this, I'll destroy you. You have no one on your side. Even your children don't believe you anymore. You're alone, Ellie. And when this is over, you'll have nothing." His words were meant to break me, to crush whatever fragile strength I had left, but instead they ignited something inside me. I leaned forward, matching his intensity, my voice a whisper but steady as steel. "You think I'm alone? You think I'm weak. But you've forgotten something. The truth doesn't need a crowd to stand. It stands on its own. And today, Julian, the truth is going to bury you." He blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in my voice. For weeks he had seen me silent, beaten down, humiliated. He had grown used to the ghost of me, not the fighter I had become. Now in the sterile hallway of the courthouse, he finally saw the woman who had survived decades of sacrifice, betrayal, and lies. Before he could respond, his lover approached her heels, clicking on the floor. She placed a manicured hand on his shoulder and sneered at me. "Still delusional, I see. Don't worry, darling," she purred to him loud enough for me to hear. "Soon she'll be nothing but a sad story people whisper about." I turned my gaze to her, and for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. "And you," I said softly, "should pray the world never hears your real story. Because when it does, pity won't be what you receive." Her smile faltered just for a moment, but then she squeezed his shoulder and whispered something in his ear. He chuckled, rising to his feet. Julian looked down at me one last time, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is your last chance, Ellie. Walk away quietly, or I'll make sure you regret every second you step into that courtroom." I rose to my feet, standing inches from him. The years of fear, the months of humiliation, the days of loneliness, all of it burned away in that moment. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You should be careful what you wish for, because regret has a way of finding the ones who deserve it most." For the first time, his smirk faltered. It was brief, just a flicker, but I saw it. A glimpse of doubt, a crack in his arrogance. He turned quickly, guiding her toward the courtroom doors. I watched them go, my heart steady, my hands calm. He thought he had cornered me, thought he had stripped me of allies' dignity, hope. But what he didn't know was that the evidence in my purse was a loaded weapon, and when the time came, it would strike with a force he could never recover from. As I sat back down waiting for my lawyer to return, I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "This ends today." And for the first time in months, I believed it. The heavy doors of the courtroom swung open, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. I walked inside with my lawyer by my side, my purse clutched tightly against me, its hidden contents more valuable than gold. The judge sat tall behind his bench, expression unreadable, while the jurors shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves. Rows of strangers filled the benches, hungry for spectacle, eager to feast on the ruins of a marriage. I could feel their eyes on me, some filled with pity, others with skepticism. And then I felt his gaze, Julian sitting proudly at his attorney's table, his lover seated just behind him, like a queen awaiting her coronation. They didn't even bother hiding their smiles. To them, this was already over. The proceedings began with the formalities, legal words spilling into the air like cold rain. My lawyer stood tall, his voice steady as he outlined our case, but I barely heard him. My focus was on the table across from me, on the man who had once been my partner, now my executioner. When his attorney rose to speak, his words were sharp and cruel, painting me as unstable, unfit, a woman clinging to illusions. I kept my face calm, though every word was another lash against my dignity. Let them speak. Let them weave their lies. Soon their own voices would betray them. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. The judge called the first witness. She rose gracefully from her seat, smoothing her black dress, her hair shimmering under the lights. She walked to the stand with the confidence of someone who believed the world adored her. The bailiff swore her in, and she sat down, crossing her legs delicately, her smile coy. My stomach turned. She began her testimony with a practiced voice dripping with false sincerity. She spoke of how she had known Julian for years, how their relationship blossomed only after he had told her I was unstable, paranoid, abusive. She painted herself as the savior, the woman who had brought joy back into his life after years of suffering with me. Her words were venomous, but the way she delivered them, soft, trembling eyes wide with faux innocence, made them seem almost believable. I could see the jurors shift uneasily, their brows furrowing. Doubt was creeping in just as they had planned. Then she twisted the knife deeper. She threatened me. The lover said, her voice breaking theatrically. She cornered me outside the store one day and told me that if I didn't leave Julian, she would ruin me. She screamed that she would destroy my reputation, that she would make sure everyone believed I was a whore. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I felt the heat rush to my face, shame and fury battling inside me. I wanted to shout, to scream that it was a lie, but my lawyer's hand touched mine, steadying me. Not yet, he whispered. Julian's attorney paced before the jury, his voice booming. Ladies and gentlemen, what you see here is not a woman protecting her marriage, but a woman unraveling. A woman so consumed by jealousy that she would fabricate wild stories, stalk her husband, and terrorize the innocent woman he turned to for comfort. Each word struck like a hammer, pounding me further into the role of the villain. I sat motionless, my hands folded, my face calm. Inside, though I was shaking with rage. Finally, it was my lawyer's turn. He rose, buttoning his jacket, and approached the stand. His tone was sharp, precise. You claim my client threatened you. Do you have any evidence of this? She blinked, feigning surprise. No, but I know what I heard. You claim she's unstable. On what basis, medical records witnesses? She hesitated. Julian told me. So your entire testimony rests on the word of a man you are romantically involved with. His question sliced through the air like a blade. She shifted uncomfortably, her smile faltering. But still, she held her ground, insisting on her fabricated story. When she stepped down, Julian himself took the stand. He looked polished, composed, the perfect picture of a wronged husband. His words were rehearsed, his tone dripping with false regret. I never wanted this. He told the court, his voice heavy with feigned sorrow. But Eleanor has become impossible to live with. She invents accusations, spies on me, lashes out. I have tried to help her, but she refuses. I'm only trying to protect myself and move on with my life. He even lowered his eyes as if to hide tears. The performance was nauseating, but I could see some jurors leaning forward, sympathy flickering in their eyes. My lawyer cross-examined, pressing him, but Julian was slippery, dodging with half-truths, redirecting questions with smooth lies. He was in his element, a man used to talking his way out of guilt. When he finally stepped down, he glanced at me, smug and victorious, as if to say, "See, no one believes you." The judge turned to my lawyer. "Do you have anything further before we move to closing arguments?" My lawyer looked at me, and I nodded. My heart hammered in my chest as he addressed the court. "Yes, Your Honor. We would like to submit new evidence." Gasps filled the room. Julian's attorney shot to his feet. "Objection. This is highly irregular." The judge raised a hand. "We'll hear it." My lawyer gestured to me. My hands trembled slightly as I reached into my purse and pulled out the flash drive. The weight of it in my palm was electric. I stood my knees steady despite the storm inside me and walked to the clerk's desk. As the files were loaded into the court system, silence fell over the room, thick and expectant. The first recording crackled to life, and then Julian's voice filled the courtroom, unmistakable. "She trusts me too much. Leave it all to me. Soon everything she owns will be ours." A collective gasp swept the room. My eyes stayed locked on Julian's face. His smirk vanished, replaced by shock, then horror. The second recording played the lover's voice, sweet and cruel. "I can't wait to see her face when she has nothing left. She'll probably cry, maybe she'll beg. It'll be hilarious." Laughter followed their laughter, echoing like a death knell. The courtroom erupted. Jurors whispered furiously. The gallery gasped. The judge slammed his gavel for order. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply watched Julian and his lover squirm as their own words stripped them bare. File after file played, each one more damning than the last, mocking my cooking, calling me a fool, detailing their plan to frame me as unstable, to take my assets, to erase me completely. The sound of their voices, once private daggers, now rang out like public confessions. Julian's attorney stammered objections, but the judge overruled them, his face hard. The juror's expression shifted from doubt to disgust, from suspicion to outrage. When the final recording ended, silence hung heavy. I stood my voice steady as I addressed the judge. For months I was painted as delusional, paranoid, unstable. They told my children I was losing my mind. They told this court I was dangerous. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, and today you have all heard it with your own ears. Julian buried his face in his hands. His lover sat frozen, her cheeks pale, her eyes darting wildly around the courtroom. The mask had shattered, and beneath it was nothing but guilt and shame. The judge leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Mr. Jenkins, do you have anything to say in response to this evidence?" Julian opened his mouth, but no words came. His confidence was gone, his arrogance deflated. He looked small, pathetic, a man undone by his own lies. The gavel struck again, echoing like thunder. The court will recess to review this evidence. But let me be clear, what I have heard today is deeply troubling. Any attempt to manipulate these proceedings will not be tolerated. As the room emptied, I remained seated, my heart racing but steady. I had done it. I had turned their weapons against them. I had taken their laughter, their mockery, their betrayal, and transformed it into the very noose that now hung around their necks. When Julian finally looked at me, his eyes were no longer smug. They were filled with fear. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, peace, because the storm they had unleashed had finally turned against them. The courtroom buzzed like a hive that had just been struck, the recording still hanging in the air like smoke from a fire. I sat motionless, letting the weight of their own voices do what my tears never could. But the drama didn't end with the gavel. That was only the spark. The fire was about to spread. When the judge called for the next witness, I expected hesitation, maybe silence. Instead, a hand rose in the gallery. My daughter, Emily. She stood, her face pale, but her chin lifted with a courage I hadn't seen since she was a child. The judge frowned but allowed her forward. She took the stand, her voice trembling at first. I wasn't supposed to say anything. She began, her eyes darting toward Julian. But I can't stay silent anymore. I overheard my father on the phone weeks ago. He said Mom was unstable, that he would make sure she looked crazy. I didn't want to believe it. I thought Mom was imagining things. But hearing those recordings today, I know she wasn't. She was telling the truth all along. Her words cracked my heart wide open. I had prepared myself for loneliness, for fighting this battle alone. But in that moment, my daughter's voice was like a bridge pulling me back from the edge. The jurors leaned forward, riveted. Julian buried his face deeper in his hands, the lover fidgeting nervously in her seat. Then Martha, my oldest friend, was called. She walked with steady steps, her eyes never leaving mine. On the stand, she recounted seeing them at restaurants, hotels, public places. I told Ellie because I couldn't let her be blind, Martha said firmly. I was called a liar, told to stay out of it. But I saw them with my own eyes, and now you've all heard them with your own ears. The lawyer smiled slightly, letting the weight of those testimonies settle. He didn't need theatrics. The truth was louder than any performance. One by one, voices that had been silent began to emerge. A neighbor testified how Julian boasted at a barbecue that Ellie is losing it soon, she won't even know what hit her. Another witness, a former colleague, revealed that Julian had withdrawn joint funds behind my back, bragging to his lover that I would never see it coming. The gallery murmured louder with each testimony. What had begun as my private humiliation had now become a public reckoning. The people who once pitied me, who whispered that I was unstable, were now seeing me in a new light. Not as a ghost, not as a broken woman, but as someone who had endured unspeakable cruelty and still stood tall. I looked around and saw it happening before my eyes, the shift. The narrative Julian had worked so hard to construct was crumbling. No longer was I the delusional wife clinging to a dying marriage. I was the truth teller, the survivor, the woman who refused to be erased. And the fire spread further still beyond the walls of that courtroom. During the recess, reporters who had gathered outside scrambled to capture every detail. I heard their voices echoing down the hallway. Wife plays secret recordings in explosive divorce trial. Lover caught mocking betrayed wife on tape. Microphones and cameras turned the story already spreading beyond the courthouse into the streets, into the homes of strangers who would read about betrayal, greed, and justice. My humiliation had become their spectacle, but this time it wasn't me being mocked. It was them. When the court reconvened, the judge's expression was grim. He turned his gaze on Julian and the woman beside him, his voice hard. What we have witnessed here is not merely infidelity. It is deception, manipulation, and an attempt to weaponize this court for personal gain. Such conduct is intolerable. His words struck like hammer blows. Julian shifted uneasily, his lover's hand trembling in her lap. I remained silent, letting the storm swirl around me, because I no longer needed to prove myself. Others were doing it for me. My daughter's voice, my friend's loyalty, my neighbor's honesty. Each testimony was another torch, lighting the truth, another witness ensuring the fire spread so wide it could never be contained. And now I turn to you, listening to my story. Have you ever been silenced by lies painted as something you're not, while the world believed the worst of you? What would you have done in my place? Would you stay quiet, or would you fight to let the truth roar until it burned away the deception? Comment a number 1 if you believe truth always finds its voice, and hit the like button if you believe betrayal must always face the light of day. As I left the stand that afternoon, I caught Julian's eyes once more. The fear there was unmistakable. He had spent months building a wall of lies around me, brick by brick, and now he was watching it collapse in flames. And the worst part for him, he hadn't been undone by my words alone. He had been undone by his own, echoed by witnesses, amplified by the community he once believed he could manipulate. The fire had spread too far. There would be no putting it out. When the gavel finally struck for the last time that week, the sound reverberated through me like thunder rolling across a valley. The trial wasn't fully over yet, but the tide had turned beyond doubt. The judge's words echoed in my mind, deception, manipulation, intolerable. For months, I had been painted as unstable, unfit, unwanted. Now the world had seen the truth. With its own eyes, heard it with its own ears. And the consequences began immediately. Julian left the courtroom with shoulders slumped his suit, rumpled his face pale. Gone was the polished arrogance, the smug smirk. His lover trailed behind him, her eyes darting nervously at the crowd that had gathered outside. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed microphones, shoved toward their faces. Did you conspire to frame your wife? How long has the affair been going on? Do you have any comment on the recordings? They shielded their faces, but there was no shielding from the storm they had unleashed. The story spread like wildfire. By evening, headlines screamed across the news, husband and mistress exposed in courtroom scandal. Neighbors who once avoided my eyes now crossed the street to pat my shoulder. Their whispers changed from pity to praise. We misjudged you, Ellie. You were stronger than we knew. Their sympathy came late, but it still warmed something inside me. For Julian, though, sympathy was nowhere to be found. His employer suspended him within 48 hours, citing serious breaches of ethics. The financial firm he had once boasted about serving decided his reputation was poison. Colleagues who once shared drinks with him now deleted his number. The lover, too, felt the sting of exposure. Her workplace, a school where she had been admired as sweet and caring, asked for her resignation after parents complained. Her perfect image had shattered. They were no longer the golden couple parading their love in public. They were pariahs marked by shame. But the punishment went deeper than headlines or jobs. My children who once looked at me with doubt now looked at him with something colder, disappointment. Emily came to me one evening, tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I believed him. I doubted you. I let him poison me against you." She sank into my arms, sobbing like the child she once was. Daniel, quieter, but no less shaken, admitted, "I don't know who he is anymore. He's not the father I thought I had." The words broke me and healed me at the same time. For months I had been alone, but now my children saw the truth. That was worth more than any verdict. As for me, the court ensured that the house remained in my name. My assets protected the petition he had drafted, ripped apart by the judge's gavel. His attempt to erase me had backfired spectacularly. Instead of walking away with everything, he now faced the possibility of losing nearly all of it. The irony was bitter, but satisfying. I will not pretend that watching him fall gave me pure joy. There was sorrow, too, a sorrow for the years, wasted the love I gave so freely the man I once believed in, who had turned into a stranger. But above that sorrow was something far greater relief. Relief that I was no longer carrying his lies. Relief that the truth had finally spoken louder than his deception. Relief that the woman he tried to erase had risen stronger than before. And so the aftermath unfolded. The phone calls stopped for him. Invitations dried up. His name, once spoken with respect, became a cautionary tale whispered with disdain. For her, the lover who had mocked me, the glamorous facade dissolved into the reality of unemployment and public shame. They had thought they could build a future on the ashes of my dignity. Instead, they found themselves living in the ruins of their own betrayal. As for me, I began to breathe again. The shadows in my house no longer felt suffocating. I could sit at my kitchen table, sip coffee, and hear silence without dread. My children visited more, my friends rallied, and strangers wrote letters of support. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the ghost they had tried to make me. And now I ask you, the one listening to my story, have you ever watched someone dig your grave with lies only to fall into it themselves? Have you ever felt the weight of betrayal turn into the fire of justice? Comment a number 1 if you believe every betrayal deserves its reckoning, and hit the like button if you believe that dignity is worth fighting for no matter the cost. When the storm finally passed, I found myself standing in the quiet of my own home, breathing air that no longer tasted of fear. The echoes of the courtroom still lingered in my mind, the gavel striking the recordings, playing the gasps of strangers. But here, in the silence of my kitchen, I realized something profound. I was free. Not because Julian had lost, not because his lover had been exposed, but because I had refused to let their betrayal define me. I had faced the fire and come out on the other side scarred, but not destroyed. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. The mornings no longer began with dread, but with sunlight spilling through the curtains. I made coffee for myself, not for him. I cooked meals I enjoyed, not the ones he criticized. I sat in the garden in the evenings, listening to the rustle of leaves, the laughter of children playing down the street, and I felt something I had thought lost, forever peace. My children, once poisoned by his lies, came back to me with new eyes. Emily brought the grandchildren more often, their laughter filling the house with warmth that had been missing for years. Daniel called late at night just to hear my voice, as if to reassure himself that I was still here, still strong. They had seen the truth, and though it hurt them, it also freed them. For the first time, I felt not only like a mother again, but like a woman whose worth was finally recognized. I met with Martha often, the friend who had stood by me when others turned away. We laughed, we cried, we remembered who I had been before betrayal consumed me. She looked at me one afternoon and said, "Ellie, you don't realize it, but you've become a symbol. People are talking about you not as the woman who was betrayed, but as the woman who fought back." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. Maybe she was right. Maybe my pain had become something bigger than me, a reminder to others that silence is not survival. As for Julian and his lover, they faded into the background, their names spoken with contempt, their faces whispered about in shame. I no longer cared where they were or what they did. Their downfall was their own making, and it no longer belonged to me. My life was mine again, and that was enough. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror, the same mirror that once reflected a hollow, broken woman. This time, I saw someone different. The lines on my face were still there, the gray in my hair still glinted under the light, but my eyes were alive again. They no longer carried the weight of invisibility. They carried strength, dignity, and peace. I whispered to my reflection, "You survived," and then louder, stronger, "You rose." And now I turn to you, the one listening to my story. Maybe you've been silenced. Maybe you've been painted as weak, as unstable, as invisible. Maybe someone you loved tried to bury you beneath their lies. But hear me when I say this, you are stronger than they think. You are not defined by betrayal. You are defined by how you rise from it. Would you have sat silently as I once did, or would you have fought until the truth roared louder than their deception? Comment a number 1 if you believe every voice deserves to be heard, and hit the like button if you agree that dignity is never negotiable. This is the closure I never thought I would have, not revenge, not bitterness, but clarity. The man I once loved is gone. The lies he built have crumbled, and I remain. My story does not end in shame. It ends with me standing taller, walking freer, and knowing that no matter what comes, I will never again allow silence to be mistaken for weakness. Because the greatest victory is not watching them fall. The greatest victory is realizing you can rise without them.